I was just 9 years old when my father left home. I remember the day like it was yesterday. It was snowing outside and it was nighttime. And I remember sitting on my bed when I heard my mom call out to us kids to come into the living room. And when I walked in, my mom and dad were standing by the front door. And beside my dad was a set of brown luggage. And I remember feeling panic and confused at that time. And my mom looked at us and said, "Kids, your dad is leaving. He doesn't love us anymore." And all I remember was watching my dad turn around and go down the stairs to the street to a waiting brown car that I didn't recognize. And I was heartbroken, confused, scared, shocked. And I remember thinking, I thought dad loved us. I thought dad loved me. Therefore, he must not love me anymore. Because why would he leave me? The affair really hurt, but it is the story that I created as a young child that had me trapped in the pain of that moment. And for years, I carried that story around with me. I believed that men couldn't be trusted, that people eventually leave, and that love isn't safe. And what really hurt was the belief that I wasn't lovable enough for someone to stay. So I spent years trying to prove that I was. I became a high achiever, a people pleaser, an attention seeker, and I didn't know how to set boundaries with people. I wanted love so desperately, but I was also so afraid. I was terrified of being hurt. And when my dad would come to see me at school and bring me lunch just so he could talk to me, I would run and hide. And not because I didn't love him, but because I had so much anger and disappointment. And as I got older, these stories followed me into my relationships. I chased unavailable, avoidant, non-committal men, the rebels, the cheaters, the bad boys, the players, the ones who would eventually cheat on me and then break up with me. I tolerated behavior I should have never tolerated, and I settled for less than I deserve. Why? Well, if I'm honest, I was terrified of being alone, being abandoned again. So, somewhere deep down, I believed that being in a relationship meant that I was worthy. And when I wasn't in a relationship, I made it mean that I was unworthy and unwanted. And here's the craziest part: once we create a story, our brain starts to look for evidence that we're right and that it's true. And it's not true, but that's how the brain works. It's always looking to make sense of things that don't make sense. The brain looks for signs of danger or threat. Anytime something looks off or wrong, whenever someone looks like they're pulling away or losing interest. And because I believed I wasn't enough, I was constantly looking to other people for validation, reassurance, and proof that I was enough. And every time a relationship didn't work out, it felt like it was a confirmation that what I believed, the stories I made up, were true. And once we decide and attach meaning to something, our brain becomes a detective building a case to prove that it's true. And eventually, we just stop questioning the story altogether. And we confuse our story that we made up as reality. Isn't that crazy? And that's one of our biggest blind spots and why so many relationships fall apart. It's because people often mistake their assumptions for fact. Most people think they're reacting to what happened, and they're not. They're reacting to what they made it mean. My father's affair wasn't the thing that hurt me. It was the story, the belief that I was unlovable, that people would leave me and that I wasn't enough. And the scary part is that most of us don't even realize that we're living inside our stories at all. We think we're dealing with facts and reality, but often they're just simply conclusions that we reached years and years ago that we never stopped to question. I was about 16 years old and I was dating this guy who was emotionally abusive. And whenever I showed emotion or I cried, he would get angry, furious with me, and he would demand that I stop crying. He would tell me, "You're too emotional. I think there's something wrong with you." He even once told me that I belonged in a mental institution because I cried when he was mean and cruel. And because of that relationship, I believed that I was broken and that crying was weakness. And so for the next 20 years, I never cried, even at my dad's funeral. I wanted to, but I was so afraid of looking weak. And I knew logically that wasn't true. I knew people cry at funerals. That's what we do, especially when it's your father. And yet, something inside of me would not allow me to be that vulnerable. And part of the reason why this happens is because of our ego. The ego's job is to keep us safe and to protect us from danger. It's all about survival with the ego, and it's constantly scanning for danger. Anything that threatens our sense of worth and belonging. And the problem is that the ego tells us stories that feel true. And if we're not careful, these stories leave us feeling anxious, hopeless, defensive, and completely alone. And most of these stories were created in childhood by painful moments, by family dynamics, by our parents, by what they said to us. And unless we become aware of them, they continue to run our adult relationships. For years, I thought that my dad leaving meant that I was unlovable. And what I eventually realized was that my father's choice had nothing to do with me and my worthiness. His affair wasn't a reflection of my value, and leaving wasn't proof that I wasn't enough or that men couldn't be trusted. It was simply the meaning that I had attached to an event that happened when I was 9. And the moment that I realized that I had made this all up, I now had a choice to make up another story, another ending, another meaning to the story that I created. So if you're struggling in your relationship right now, I want you to ask yourself a couple questions. What story have you been telling yourself, about your partner, that actually isn't true? Just like I shared mine. And what assumptions or fears or beliefs have you turned into facts? Because we don't see people as they are. We see people through the lens of our beliefs, our wounds, our fears, our past experiences, and our conditioning. And the truth is, we often don't see ourselves clearly either. The people in our lives become our mirrors, and they can reflect our insecurities and expose our fears and reveal the stories that we've been carrying around for years. And that's why so many of our triggers actually aren't about the person in front of us. They're about the wounds that we haven't healed. They're about the meaning that we attached to things that have happened to us. And if you're not careful, you can spend years fighting a story that was never true and lose someone you love in the process. Most people think that their partner is the problem, but often the real problem is the meaning, the stories that they attach, that they make up about their partner. And the moment you're willing to question that story and bring compassion and forgiveness and critical thinking into the equation, you now create space for new possibilities and a new future.